Hey, you guys did it. Welcome back to the last part of my data binding mini tutorial within my big Angular course. And we're going to talk about two-way binding today in this video. Now, two-way binding is now we're going from the component to the UI, and then we're actually going back from the UI back to the component. When we talked about interpolation and property binding or event binding or class binding, it was more of a one-way binding where you'd either go from the component to the UI or you would go from the UI to the component. In the case of event binding, you're actually going from the UI to the component because at the UI is where you're catching your event, and that will bind down to your component and you can catch that event and handle it. Now, before we start with two-way binding and actually coding a two-way bind example, we first must include a module that is located in Angular Forms. So you would import Forms module from Angular Forms, which is an Angular library, and then you would put the Forms module in the imports array. Now, I find this is a good situation where I can now explain what these things are. So Angular, the Angular app has actually tiers, and at the highest level, the highest tier is your module. In this particular case, we have a module called app module. And this app module contains other modules, other components, and I'll talk about what providers are, and providers in the app module. Now, in our cases, the components that we've been adding so far in this app will always go under declarations. Components, pipes, directives, they all belong to the declarations array, and they all belong to our app module. If you if you think about components, they really only have a class, and then you're going to have a UI that's related to it, or you can bind to it at the when you're coding the front end, and then handling the binding itself. With modules, you don't have that. A module itself is another big wrapper of components, pipes, and directives. And the point here is you can think of, so let's think about this for a second. You can think of a module as my whole Angular course. And then my mini series that I'm doing right now of data binding, okay, would be one particular module in my Angular course. So if I put another mini series on observables, then that would itself would be another module within my Angular course, and my Angular course, represents my app. And then the videos themselves that are part of my Angular course would be the components. It would be the building blocks of that particular module. Now, the modules usually will have a group of directives and other modules that depend on it. And then they'll also, so let me talk about providers. So the providers, that is where your injectable services will go, which will be used by the components, directives, and pipes in this whole module, in the whole app module. And that's what each of these arrays represents. Which means that you can actually compartmentalize your app to the most granular level, because you can build another module outside of this app module. We can call it something like a credit card module, And that credit card module could have in it a list of declarations for it. It could have a mask component. It could have a encryption component to it. And then that credit card module itself will also have imports that will represent any libraries that we need for that particular credit card module. And then that would also have its own providers. It would have its own providers. And then the way that we can talk to it is we would import the credit card module here and be able to access all the things that we can access for that particular module. So it kind of just goes on and on, but you can think of it as the module itself is my Angular course, and then my Angular course will have little mini modules. So it's kind of like the app module is the master module. That's my Angular course. Then within my Angular course, you're gonna have different modules that we need. So now we just created our data binding module. So I'd put that in imports, and then that data binding module is going to have its own declaration. So it's going to have videos on event binding. It's going to have another video on interpolation, property binding. So those are the components themselves. Okay, it's just that we are just using one master module as our app, and then we're just utilizing Angular's modules that include. So modules they're going to be, you can think of it also as libraries within your app. Okay, but think your app is really one big module which covers or contains components, modules themselves, and then providers. And providers we'll get to. We'll create a service in later videos for our app. Okay. Now that was a good. I think that's kind of like in a high level. If you have any more questions, you can always drop me a comment. But let's get to the point of creating a two-way bind. So the first thing, again, don't forget to include the forms module, and then you import that. You include it in our imports array, and that's good so far. And then you would build a two-way bind component, right? I already did that for you. So we have our two-way bind component. I have the TypeScript for it, and I'm just creating a text variable of string type, and then my HTML is just going to have a text box with a property or with an interpolation example here. Now when I use a two-way binding, what it means is that we want to go from UI to component, and then from component to UI. And this is what ng module binds me, is that I can bind a text box to a particular variable using ng mod. So this particular text box has a property binded to it called text, which is contained in my class, my component class called text. And then as I type here, because it's binded to my property, when I use interpolation, this will change as well, not only on the front end, but it will also change the value on the actual component level. Okay, and then anytime that we have a typing in on a text box, my variable itself will change on the back end. So let's actually do that now. If I show you the example, okay. Okay, so let's take a look at this example here. And as I'm typing something, you saw that the interpolated variable will change. So if I type in my name, hello world, you see that as I type my text, the value of the variable as well will change in real time. Okay, so what does that buy you? What does that buy you? What is the advantages of this two-way binding? Well, what what it's going to buy you is that if you have a form, and as you're when you're submitting data to a form and you're trying to change the value, okay, previously if you came from the JavaScript world or you came from the actual jQuery world, you would actually have to get the DOM, get the value, and then see if you can make a call. I mean, you may have to make a call to some type of web service, and it just became really, really tedious. But in Angular, it's so simple where we can actually bind a property to a control, such as a text box. And then now, as I type and I change, I can perhaps catch this in a component, and either I can send the data somewhere or I can manipulate the data just through a variable. I don't have to go through the trouble of grabbing the data from the DOM or looking for the control, or if I have a list of controls, I don't have to loop through it and get the class name, and then if this changes, so I don't have to do that anymore. I can just bind my controls to my properties in my component. Now I wouldn't do it this way. I wouldn't create a component. I wouldn't create a I wouldn't put properties in here. I would probably create an object that would be accessible by my component, and then the object properties themselves would be binded to my form, so that way you have an object model that binds to a particular form, and it's reusable throughout your application. Okay, that's the way I would do it, but it's just a simple example of showing you how. So the two-way binding, again, it works by you create a variable in your component, and then simple enough, you can just bind it using the ng model directive and pass in the actual property name. And then as you change the property name on the UI, it will also change on the model class. And then if you change it here, it's also going to change back in the actual text box model itself. Okay, I hope that clarified a lot of things on data binding and all that. So two-way binding is very important. You're probably gonna use it when you create a form of some kind. So it's very important that you use it. You're able to use it. You understand how to use it. Okay. So any questions you have, you can always reach out to me at parttimemagic@gmail.com, or you can shout me on in the comments. I usually reply to comments. I try to reply to some comments if I can. Or you can just visit my website, parttimeadjunct.com. Don't forget to subscribe. Trying to get to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the summer. It's April, so I got May, June. I got 2 months. So that's about 500 subscribers. No, about 300 subscribers per month. So I'm trying to get up to that number. Help me out if you can. Share with your friends. Free course. Come on, guys. Free course. I mean, you can't beat that. You can go to Udemy and pay 10, 15 bucks, or you can come here, get a free course, and I'll guide you through what you need to build an Angular app. All right, and I answer your questions personally, so you can't beat that. Find something that beats that, and I'll definitely see if I can get my game up. All right, so thank you for watching. Next mini series, I am going to touch upon something very, very useful, and that is, you got to check out my next video to know it. All right, take care. Bye.